pipe welds,
Yeah.
or old buildings, you might see welds like this. Let's say we have the same thickness plate. And a lot of guys do this if they're what we call rig welders. They go out in pipelines. They get paid by the joint. So the faster they weld the joint, the more money they get. So they're going to take big rods, say maybe 7/32 diameter rod, and they're going to try to do this in maybe one pass and then do a second pass with a wide weed bead, as opposed to doing all these. This will make him more money if he's getting paid per joint, but this weld is usually weaker because you're putting a lot more heat into this metal and you're fatiguing the metal. So if you're doing like critical welds, like I said, the Hastelloy or titaniums, you've just destroyed your metal. It's no good. So there are instances when you can do weave beads, but in what we've learned over the years from metallurgy and stuff, wide weave beads is not the way to go. Small stringer beads will get you less distortion. The other thing too, the more heat you put in the metal, if you're doing a flat plate like you're welding here on the bench and you do a flat plate with wide beads like that, your plate will probably end up, I'm trying to remember how they usually bend.
Yeah.
You'll end up with your welds here and your plates will be looking like wings.
Yep.
Because this heat will pull
that
plates
much
up.
too. No kidding.
So how do you stop that when you've got all that weld and all that heat in there for so long?
What they call restraining it or clamping it. You want to clamp it down. Vice grips. If you're doing smaller stuff, just vice grip it to the table. Or you can put what we call chill plates. I know I'm getting away from amperage is what this talked about, but
Well, we're controlling temperature. It's all sort of one concept, and heat distortion.
yeah. So if you're doing a part that you don't want to distort at all, you can take copper or thick aluminum and put it on the back, even all the way over here, say, clamp it. And the copper and the aluminum will draw the heat out. And as long as you're clamping that together, the heat will come from here into the aluminum. And that'll help prevent this from ending up looking like that.
So you don't think it's wrong to overcorrect it pre?
You can, that's another way to do it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of different ways to control distortion. What the call was saying is pre-bend your...
Preload, what do you call
Preload it, yeah. So you take your plates, basically.
it?
I'm being exaggerated here, but you can't even draw. But you set them like that, so when you weld, all these passes, these plates will come up. They'll bend up towards the heat.
And when it finishes curing or setting, it'll be perfectly flat when you're done.
And this is more of art than a science. It takes years of experience to know how much to preset that.
Some guys do handrails like that. They're totally out of whack, and by the time they're done, it's perfectly square.
Yep.
It's an art, yeah.
Yeah, you can also, so if you do have a weld, you end up like that. If it's carbon steel, you can take oxyacetylene torch, again, back to being art, because you got to know about where to put it. But you can heat this side up here, and that plate will pull back down some. So there's ways to undistort things a little bit. There's limitations.
Better to do it right in the beginning, though.
Yes, less frustration
More
and time.
stringers, more preparation, and experience helps a lot.
But distortion is a big problem in welding. I don't know if any of you run into it yet. While you've been welding here, you'll see the metals bending on you. One night what I'll do is I'll bring in some thin stainless steel and I'll weld it without any clamps, and you'll see it just warp like an ocean wave. You take two thin pieces of stainless, a butt joint, and you put them together and you start welding, and as you weld, they'll actually lap, and you'll go from a butt joint to a lap joint before you get to the end of your weld.
Oh yeah.
That's how much the heat will distort metal. It'll just move on you.
That's why in general tacking everything completely before you weld it up is always the best approach. And then tacking, then when you do begin to weld it, staggering or you know, doing different positions on your welds instead of just one continuous line is always the best.
Yeah, there's also, with your heat inputs, looking down from the top, there's, let's say we're going to do a butt joint. on stainless. Stainless is one of your worst ones for distortion. It likes to bend. It doesn't spread heat out very evenly like aluminum or copper does. So it holds heat in one spot. That's why it distorts so much. So if we're going to weld real thin aluminum, say, most of us are right-handed, so we're going to weld from right to left if we're TIG welding, say. So we'll go from right to left. So we're going to start to weld here and go all the way over. Well, this joint, like I said, will lap over. So one of the things you want to do with thin stainless is, and it works with other metals, is like the call said, we'll tack it over here, we'll tack it here, we'll tack in the middle, and on especially small stuff, you'll have a tack almost every inch. Okay, so now we got a lot of tacks in it, but it's still, stainless will distort even though you tack it that much. So what we do is called backstepping. So instead of starting on the right here and coming all the way over, we'll start at this tack weld and weld to there. Then we'll come back here, start here, and weld to that tack weld. Then we'll go back to this tack weld and weld here. And then from there, and then the weld is finished. You have a lot more starts and stops, but the heat, if you're welding from this side all the way over, the heat just keeps traveling and you're going to distort it. So what you're doing here is you're only doing an inch long weld, and then you go back into the cold metal and then welding again. So you end up get less distortion that way as you keep going back into the cold part of the metal and then welding forward for an inch. That's another way to help keep it from ending up like that. So there's a lot of tricks you'll learn as you go along with welding that'll help you in the future. These are just some of the basics. Any questions? I could go on and on, but I don't want to bore you totally.
Tom wanted to say a couple things on some of the welding books.
Me and Rich are kind of old school welders. We have books like I do, really old. I found that you go to eBay and like old book stores, they'll have old welding books in there that are actually have a lot of good information because they actually start with the history of welding and helps you understand the whole process of welding, of how it works. And that's the kind of books that he has, the kind of books I have. The newer books seem to kind of gloss over that. They want cliff notes. Everyone wants to learn something really fast. But I found that the older books that I have, I read those when somebody asks me a question that makes you really go back to thinking about really what you're doing. Look for those. They're not really that expensive. I have a book similar to the it's called Principles of Welding by Lincoln Electric. I paid $16 for it at a college.
Yeah.
They were giving them away.
Yeah, I found them first. I found a whole set for $1 a piece. So some great books out there.
They didn't even realize what they had. The teacher did, but it's just the fact that you can find books that are older and just, you don't have to like read them at night while you're watching. Just read certain sections that you're interested in because it tells you a lot more, and then when you come here or you're at work, it automatically comes to you. And then it clicks with you what they were talking about. It makes sense because the books were written for people who think like that. They weren't written for somebody that goes to 8-year college. They write it for people who understand the hands-on part. So bookstore, old bookstores, used bookstores, eBay, look for those. They're really good. And I don't ever let anybody look at my library because they seem to walk off. So, but you know, if somebody has a big question and I don't have the answer to, or he doesn't have, we look at the books. That's where we learn from, and that's how you'll learn from too if you get those books too.
This book was first published in 1933, and what's one nice thing about basic welding is it doesn't really change that much. So what was practical back in 1933 is still practical today. It's just the machines have reduced a lot in size. Like I've showed some of you, the Call's got a 300 amp miller machine over here. You look at that thing and see how big it is. Imagine years ago, we would have to drag that around if we wanted to TIG weld. Nowadays, you have machines about this size that are about 300 amps. The Call has some of the XMT 300s in here. What are they, 350s?
Yeah.
And they're about this size here. So that's a 350 amp machine that you can carry out now. Where in the old days, you needed a crane and a forklift to haul out a 300 amp machine.
Yeah, that's neat. So
But as far as the basic technique and the amperages that you're using, that hasn't changed. And this is the 14th edition. This book is 14 years old right here. But this is one of the best books you can get because it has welding procedures in it. And companies pay thousands, and ask the call how much he's had to pay to get a CWI to do welding procedures for him.
many thousands.
Thousands of dollars, maybe for just one WPS, and this book is full of WPSs in here. So you can't beat the $25 price for this for all the information.